Hello everyone, this is Cadaver Guy. This is going to be pretty different from my normal videos. This is going to be completely unscripted. I thought of my point in advance, so I have an idea of what I want to say, but I will not have any explicit lines or words that I'm trying to get out there. Just sort of rambling about my thoughts on Pokemon, you know, in case you couldn't get enough of that. This one's going to be a little more casual. A couple months ago, there was a trend on TikTok where you would post your Pokemon hot takes, and they would get progressively hotter as you went through. So you'd start on a 10% hot take, and that would be something that most people agree with, and then you gradually build your way up to 100%, which is like, only you believe this. This is a very out there kind of take. And I posted one of those on my TikTok. Follow my TikTok if you want. I don't plan on doing any cross integration or whatever fucking brand word you're supposed to use. I'm just using my TikTok for fun TikTok stuff. I'm Canadian. I'm not going to get paid off of it. Follow if you want. Cadaver Guy face reveal? True. But it got me thinking, and I wanted to do a quick video where I sort of expanded on the hot takes that I present in my TikTok and just ramble about them for a bit. All right, we're just going to jump right into it with the 10% hot take. 10%. Please stop making every starter trio dark plus fighting, psychic, ghost, fairy. We get it, Game Freak. You like the secondary type triangle. Do something different for the love of God. For those who don't know, since Generation 6, there have been 5 starter trios. We're not going to talk about Galars because they are all monotype, and I think most of us agree that's kind of boring. Out of the remaining starter trios, every single one has had a dark type Pokemon. We have Greninja in Gen 6, we have Incineroar in Gen 7, Legends Arceus has Samurott, and Gen 9 has Meowscarada. Not only does every trio have a dark type, but the other 2 starter Pokemon have their secondary types based off of the dark type. One is super effective against dark, one is weak to dark. In Gen 6, this formed a perfect triangle, so dark beats psychic, psychic beats fighting, fighting beats dark, and that matched up with the starters. So Greninja was the water dark type, meaning it lost to the grass fighting Chestnut, but beat the fire psychic Delphox. In Gen 7, they didn't have this perfect triangle aspect. They had Ghost and Fairy as the 2 other types, and they don't have any interaction between each other, but the dark type interactions were still there. Fairy beats Dark, Dark beats Ghost. It was minimized a little bit too because they gave Dark to the Fire starter, and then they made the other type Fairy. So Fairy is resisted by fire, so the Fairy weakness doesn't even come up for Incineroar. But regardless, they picked the types the same way. One good against dark, one's bad against dark. So then, Gen 8, we skip, and then we go to Legends Arceus, and they actually just completely redid Kalos' starter trio. They just subbed out the Fire Psychic for Fire Ghost. I definitely feel like it would have been more interesting to have different types in this trio. Maybe if they wanted to go with like Grass Dark, you know, maybe they didn't want to do Fire Fighting, but they could have done something, you know, just not completely redo Kalos' starters. And then Gen 9, they finally do something a little interesting with it, where the type triangle goes opposite of the starter type triangle. So Meowscarada is Grass Dark. Its Grass is good against Quaquaval's Water, but its Dark is good against Skeledirge's Ghost. And you see that with the other starters as well. This does screw over Skeledirge a little bit because while it is immune to fighting moves, it's not super effective against them. So now both of the other starters just kind of hit it super effectively, and it can't do the same to Quaquaval. But regardless, the reverse triangle is a little interesting. That being said, 4 of the past 5 games have had basically the same pool of starter types, starter secondary types, I should say, with the only exception being where they were all monotype. So I would be very surprised if they do another dark type starter anytime soon, but I just want to put it out there, I really don't think they should. I think they should steer away from dark, they should steer away from fighting and ghost. Psychic and fairy, they only have one of each, but I would not want them both at the same time. Really, I kind of just want them to do what they did in the old games, where they just give their starters secondary types based on their designs. Like, Swampert is water ground. It doesn't need to be water ground to help check Blaziken better or to make it worse versus Sceptile. Those do happen, but it's water ground because it lives in muddy water. It just sort of feels like they're forcing this secondary interaction and it's just getting stale. 20%. Larry is not a hear me out. We're all on the same page here. I don't think I need to explain this one very much. Man's hot.
You're in the real world, your headcanon rules won't be accepted.
%. Black and White would have had a near perfect selection of Pokemon if they'd cut the designs copying old Pokemon and just put those old Pokemon in. All those rehashes did was make Gen 5 feel like it was running out of ideas. So, a criticism of Gen 5 is that a lot of the Pokemon feel like they are just redoing what was done before. And that's because they have a completely new region with all new Pokemon. They needed to recapture some of the ecological niches that old Pokemon filled. But I would also say that that criticism is extended a little further than it should be. I think there are plenty of Pokemon who do the same thing as Pokemon that came before them, but do it in a different enough way that if Pokemon Black and White wasn't positioned as this completely fresh start, all new, never before seen region with all new Pokemon, people wouldn't make these comparisons as much. You know, the big one is Musharna versus Hypno. They're both based on this myth of the dream-eating tapir, but they do it completely differently. They have very different vibes, they have very different designs. One is the dreamer, one is the dream stealer, and I think that's really interesting. Another example is Drillbur. Drillbur gets a lot of comparisons both to Diglett as a fellow mole and to Sandshrew for their general look and body shape and all that. But I feel that, again, if Black and White wasn't positioned as the brand new Pokemon game with all new Pokemon never before seen, people wouldn't make this comparison as much. Drillbur could just be Drillbur without being the new Sandshrew, you know? So there's a couple of designs that I would say don't really get away from this. I'd say stuff like Audino just being knockoff Chansey, Sock and Throw being knockoff Hitmons, Woobat being knockoff Zubat. Like, these designs, I'd say, don't do enough to get away from their originals. Their new ideas aren't that interesting, and so they're just sort of left being the second version of something that came before. So I'd say if they cut designs like that, just put in the old Pokemon there, maybe even add a few more, just, you know, expand the region a little bit. The new Pokemon that Black and White did add could have been more widely celebrated. And then, you know, when Black and White does do its own completely original thing, I think it has some of the best designs in the series. I love Solosis, I love Sandile, I love Golett. Everyone loves, you know, all the bugs, basically. Like, Gen 5 does have a lot of really solid designs, and the region as a whole was held back by this insistence that everything has to be new, while also not making the new stuff feel new. 40%. Wynot is the best baby Pokemon. He is so precious to me. So it's only not higher because not many people care about baby Pokemon. I think Togepi Lover 84 will log on and tell me I'm a fool for prioritizing Wynot over other more beloved baby Pokemon, and the rest of you won't care. When I posted this, I was mostly just thinking of its visual design. I think Wynot is the cutest baby Pokemon. I love his happy smile, big happy eyes. He's just so silly. I also think he's a little creepy, subtly, because if you take where his face is to be like the torso, and you take that thing on his head to be the actual head, he looks like a little slumped over doll. He looks like a little man, somewhat. And it's kind of creepy when you first notice that. You're like, oh, he's kind of humanoid in that way. So from that standpoint, I was already on board Wynot being best baby Pokemon. But then I thought about it some more after posting this, and I kind of feel like Wynot is the only baby Pokemon to get all of the upsides of being a baby with none of the downsides. So it's kind of unofficial policy for Pokemon that you only evolve 3 times. You get Poliwag into Poliwhirl into Poliwrath, and Poliwrath can never evolve because it's the 3rd stage. You can go back to Poliwhirl and give it a branched evolution into Politoed, but Poliwrath is done. There's nothing that can be done to build on Poliwrath, save for, you know, giving it a Mega, right? So when you go back and you add a baby Pokemon to a line, that is stopping yourself from adding an evolution in the future. So you take something like Electabuzz, right? And you give it Elekid. Then when you give it Electivire again in the future, that's saying, all right, Electivire never growing up ever again. Electivire is the end of its branch. If you wanted to add anything else to Electabuzz, you'd have to go back and make it a branched evolution, or in modern gens, a regional form. But like Electivire itself, Synovian Electivire, whatever you want to call it, never going to get any evolution. And that's because Elekid exists. Now, you could also argue that Electabuzz wouldn't make sense as the first evolution in a 3 evolution chain, and that, you know, Elekid kind of exists mostly for flavor reasons, and I think that's valid, but you have to sacrifice game balance in making Electivire stronger in future generations in exchange for having cute little baby Elekid. And maybe that's a trade you want to make, but I'm just saying that that limit exists for every baby Pokemon except Wynot. When you look at Wobbuffet and you look at its game plan, it is really the only Pokemon in existence that does not want an evolution. When you evolve, you gain extra stats, but Wobbuffet only has one stat it cares about. You know, it's not very fast, so giving it a speed buff wouldn't be very beneficial, and most of its moves are negative priority anyway, so you're probably not going to want a fast Wobbuffet to begin with. And then, of course, its attacking stats it doesn't use. It doesn't learn any direct attacks. And then you look at its defenses, and you're like, oh, maybe if it, you know, gains more defenses, that would be helpful. But it gaining more defense means it takes less damage. It taking less damage means it deals less damage with counter and mirror coat. Unless an evolution came along that strictly buffed the HP stat, Wobbuffet's not going to want an evolution. It's not even going to want to hold the Eviolite item because, again, that's boosting its defense, making it take less damage. So Wobbuffet, being the one Pokemon who doesn't really need or want to progress further, is super open to having a baby Pokemon expand it downwards, you know, give it that sort of benefit of having a cute little baby Pokemon without further restricting the line, because the line's already restricted just based on its game plan. So yeah, I think Wynot kind of has the best of both worlds for baby Pokemon, and is the best one, objectively. 50%. Ugly yet unique designs like Bruxish and Vullaby are leagues better than boring designs like Seaking and Squawkabilly. I don't know why this is so heavily compressed. I think maybe the picture I picked was small and TikTok didn't know what to do when I uploaded it. But yeah, so when people talk about their least favorite Pokemon, like the one that always comes up is Bruxish. Bruxish is like the first one people sound off in the comments like, oh my god, I can't believe anyone actually likes Bruxish. Are there any Bruxish fans out there? Who could they even be? Bruxish is so ugly, man, and it's like, I feel like crazy going to bat for this thing because it is objectively ugly and bad and hard to look at. But that's at least interesting. It's at least doing something different. It's supposed to look like that. And, you know, you could also argue like ugly on purpose is still ugly. I think that's valid. But I just think that's a more interesting design than something like Seaking, like Lumineon, which are just kind of safe, boring fish. I would rather take a more imaginative angler fish with the sharp teeth. I think there's a specific tropic fish it's supposed to emulate, but then it's got the angler on its head, so it's kind of bringing in both. That's way more interesting than just koi fish with horn, you know? Friggin' normal-ass fish with butterfly fins. I just think it does more, it's more inventive, and I don't know. I appreciate how weird it is. I listed Vullaby as another example. You know, people bash Vullaby for being diaper baby, which, again, valid, but I think it does stand out. Like, it's something memorable. You may not remember it all the time, but then you'll have it pop up in your mind. You're like, oh yeah, the skull diaper bird. That's weird. And then, like, what do you think about when you think of Squawkabilly? What do you think of when you think of fucking Farfetch'd? You know, just nothing. It does nothing. I didn't list it here, but Stunfisk is another example. Stunfisk is so ugly. It's so gross, but it's also just kind of funny. I'm very glad that one of the designers at Game Freak literally walked up and said, I want to make the flattest Pokemon who ever existed. That's a real thing, by the way. That's the real inspiration behind its design. Yeah, no, I just think there's more there. It's more interesting. And I think people should stop bashing Bruxish for being ugly. I think that's the point. 60%. I never found the Bidoof is God jokes funny. Why does the internet keep reinventing Chuck Norris jokes every few years? Not a lot to say about this. joke's just not funny. I'm glad people got a kick out of it. You know, if you were a big Bidoof is God enjoyer, nothing against you. I do admit I found the one thing funny where it's like 1 Bidoof versus 5 legendaries, and he's like, then it's an even fight. Haha, very funny. But like, yeah, it's just Chuck Norris jokes again. It's the same thing with Ultra Instinct Shaggy. Like, you guys just, you're reinventing the wheel here. It's just not cool or interesting. That's not to say Pokemon fan community jokes are always bad. I'm a very big fan of Cunty Reggie Rock with a handbag, but just the Bidoof one got old fast. It overstayed its welcome, in my opinion. I don't know. Maybe it just doesn't hit because I'm not a big Bidoof guy. Maybe if this was Zigzagoon as God, I would be more on board with it, but I don't know. It's just not doing anything for me. Sorry. All right, this is the one that actually made me inspired to do this hot take post to begin with. 70%. They need to stop basing water starters on aquatic animals. The grass and fire starters tend to feel way more creative and interesting because they adapt the animals they're based on to fit the element. Every water starter besides Sobble is already associated with water. I'd personally really dig a horse water starter, but I know elephant is also a popular fan idea. I will also say you could argue Squirtle is not a turtle, but a tortoise, and tortoises aren't water-based, they're completely landlocked. However, the visual language between turtle and tortoise are so similar that it's really hard to make that argument, and then you're still dealing with a lot of turtle stuff. Turtle is already aquatic, even if tortoise isn't. So I'm really only giving a pass to Sobble being a chameleon, and then the other 8 all aquatic. And then you can't even argue the others, like crocodile, axolotl, penguin, otter, frog, seal, and duck. Like, those are all water creatures. When you look at the fire starters, obviously there's a lot less fire-breathing animals than there are water-swimming animals. Even if you were to, like, exclusively do fire starters are Pokemon from hot climates, they haven't really stuck to that. They've, you know, allowed themselves to expand outwards. You have chicken, pig, fox, crocodile. Like, you've done a lot with the fire starter, and, you know, that's kind of cool. I like how weird the fire starters are allowed to be. Same thing with grass. There are a lot of animals associated with vegetation, but even when they're turned into grass starters, they aren't necessarily tied to that. You know, when you think frog and you think plant, first thought, I'm pretty sure for everyone, is lily pad. But then you look at Bulbasaur being, you know, directly inspired by frogs, and it does not have a lily pad theme. It just has this big jungle flower on its back. It feels weird. It feels like a jungle creature, not a swamp or a bog creature. Meganium being a giant long-necked dinosaur you'd associate with like trees, but no, it's flower. Fire and grass have adapted their animals to fit the elements of grass and fire. But the water starters are all just based on animals who, like, if you're telling me you're making an axolotl Pokemon, I'm assuming it's going to be a water type to begin with. If you're making a duck, I'd assume flying first, but then water's my second pick. Frog, I'd assume water. It just feels not lazy, but like the first thing you would think of, right? And so I would love to see water Pokemon that aren't based on aquatic animals. I picked horse because it still has that tie to water. There's that Greek story of Poseidon creating the horse from the tide or whatever it was. I know elephant is a popular one. I don't know if elephant has any ties to water in mythology, but that could still be cool. And then even if they wanted to get weird, I know I just bashed the dark starter, but there's a joke saying that, you know, we have fire dark cat, grass dark cat. We need the water dark cat to complete the trilogy. And honestly, that would be kind of funny. For a second, maybe they shouldn't do that. They should stay away from dark starters, but like, you get what I'm saying, is just allow the water starters to be more out there. Because right now it just kind of feels like, you know, of course you're going to make the turtle a water type. Of course you're going to make the sea lion a water type. Like, it's just, come on, do something else. Be weird. 80%. I did not care for the Charcadet line. Not much to say here. I just feel like a lot of people got really on board with the Charcadet really quickly, and, you know, even those who didn't like it just kind of grew to like it over time, and I've just never really gotten on board with it. I don't like the criticism that something doesn't feel like a Pokemon. What does that even mean, right? Pokemon is such a broad category of design that, you know, anything can really feel like a Pokemon if you put your mind to it. But just, they do kind of feel like they're taken from another series. They kind of feel like Mega Man bosses is the main one I've seen. Honestly, if you told me these were like twin protagonists or like rivals or something from like a 90s anime, I would believe you. Like they're missing something. I don't know. It just doesn't do anything for me. The idea of this little fiery spirit inhabiting a suit of armor, you know, doesn't really, that's it. That's all you're doing. You're just inhabiting the suit of armor. You're making sword, you're making cannon. I mean, all right. And I'm glad that people like them, but frankly, I think they are the weakest fire types in Gen 9. Not saying much. I like a lot of the fire types in Gen 9, but like, I'd take a Scovillain over this any day, frankly. 90%. Legends ZA seems to be stepping away from all the cool stuff Legends Arceus did to make the player character more active in the gameplay, and I think that's going to make ZA less fun overall. I really hope I'm wrong on this one. So I want to make a full video about this. I'm planning on starting that as soon as I get this video and the Slowpoke follow-up out, but just to sort of simplify it, Legends Arceus was the first Pokemon game to make the player character a playable character. When you look at the previous Pokemon games, and even Scarlet and Violet, the player character solely exists to get the Pokemon that you are carrying from battle to battle. It's kind of like the old Final Fantasy, Zelda 2, games like that, where you would walk across a map and then you'd enter a dungeon or you'd get into a fight, and then all of a sudden you'd like transition to a brand new character. And like, the character on the map is supposed to be the same one in the battles, but like, you know, your moveset, your sprite, they're all entirely different, right? In this case, they are different characters. Your Pokemon trainer is just the avatar for the 6 Pokemon you have in your party to walk around the map. For the past, you know, nearly 30 years of Pokemon's existence, the player character has not really done much of anything. And Legends Arceus is the first time that wasn't the case. The player character is the one running around the map collecting resources, the one running around the map tossing Pokeballs, trying to stay hidden, using bait, using smoke screen to try and disguise themselves and not get into fights. And then when the Pokemon do get enraged, it's the player character dodging out of the way. It's the player character who gets injured and drops all of their shit when a Pokemon attacks them. And that was such a cool change of pace. It made Legends Arceus feel like a wilderness. It felt threatening because for once you were the one being threatened. You know, in old Pokemon games, if you lose, you just drop all your money and run to the nearest Pokemon Center. But like, your character doesn't get hurt. Even if it's like a giant legendary Pokemon that defeated you, you can still run away at the end. In Legends Arceus, you can have your entire party of Pokemon faint and still keep running around the wilds. It's you who needs to watch out, because once your Pokemon are fainted, there's nothing protecting you from all of the hazards out there. You can fall to your death in Legends Arceus. Like, that's just such a thing that doesn't happen in other Pokemon games. Even in Scarlet and Violet, where you finally have like an open map, the Rotom phone stops you from running off the edge, because that's, you know, not that kind of game. You're not supposed to fall off the edge. So I understand if they don't want to do that for regular Pokemon games. So I was really hoping when I heard Legends ZA announced that it would be more like that we'd get maybe like Ancient Kalos right after the Great War, in the wake of the Mega Evolution discovery, you know, kind of like Legends Arceus, where you're exploring new possibilities. Instead of exploring a new region, you're exploring Mega Evolution, and you could be one of the first Mega Evolution monks in Shalor City or whatever their title is. But no, we're modern day. We're a couple years after X and Y concluded. We're stuck to Lumio City exclusively. We're not doing anything outside of the city. They have to add wild areas into the city so you can still catch Pokemon. And I don't know, like, maybe they just haven't shown it in the trailers yet, but like, it just looks like it's been pared down. You're able to toss Pokeballs still, but the Pokemon don't seem to do much while you're doing that. The new real-time battle stuff looks interesting, but for the most part, your Pokemon are just moving on their own. You're just deciding when to attack. And even if, you know, it does turn out that you're able to move your guy, like, the player character still isn't doing anything. It's just your Pokemon moving around. So, like, again, you're sort of losing this factor of the player character being an agent in the game who has stuff to do. Like, it feels kind of crazy, but yeah, like, the player character just isn't a factor in most Pokemon games. And I do think that translated to people engaging with the game more. Like I said, it felt dangerous to be out in the world of Hisui and have these wild Pokemon attack you. And I don't think we're going to get that feel from Legends ZA. Now, I'm planning on making the video about this, and I don't want to go into the game assuming it's going to be bad. You know, I'm not going in thinking I'm going to make my video and that's going to shape my experience of the game. You know, if it turns out it does have stuff that makes the game feel engaging and like the player character is doing stuff, I'll make a note of that. I'll talk about how ZA continues the stuff set up by Legends Arceus. If it doesn't, then, you know, that'll be a point of comparison, or how Legends games are an opportunity for Pokemon to do different things, and it seems like they may not always stick to what works. If ZA does something that surprises me that Legends Arceus doesn't, I definitely plan on touching on that. I don't want to say I'm going in with low expectations, because I'm very clearly not. I have high expectations for what it should be delivering. I just don't expect that they're going to do that, if that makes sense. It's low expectations for my high expectations. Alright, my 100% hottest take. This one might genuinely get some people upset, and I apologize in advance. If you want to get your tomatoes ready, now's the time. 100%. On average, the moving 2D sprites look worse than the 3D models, especially for Gen 1 through 4 Pokemon. The 3D models are still ass, I just hate how jank those moving sprites look. So this is definitely a minority take. I know so many people who talk about how much they miss the Gen 5 sprite look and it was their favorite and they should do a whole game again with 2D sprites and it would look so much better than the stinky 3D models we have now. I don't agree. The main issue I think the 2D sprites have that the 3D models fix is how quick the motion is. The animation for a lot of them loops very quickly. They're just sort of moving for motion's sake, I guess I would call it. Like if you look at, you know, Watchog, he's leaning back and forth, his tail's wiggling, his cheeks are inflating. What is he doing? Right? What does that motion tell you? I guess he's like on guard, but like his eyes aren't moving. Like none of that motion means anything. It shows that he's awake. It shows that he's, you know, present and accounted for. But I just don't know what most of these Pokemon are trying to do in their animation. That's the point that you hear the most, is that the moving sprites made them feel so alive and the 3D models make them feel like statues. But the 3D models do move. Like, obviously some Pokemon move more than others, but if you look at all of them, other than ones that are like deliberately still, like Darmanitan Zen mode or whatever, they all have motion. They're all bobbing there, they're all breathing in and out, they're all, you know, living. And I prefer that kind of motion. I prefer the slower, more collected, intentional motion. The 2D sprites definitely move more. They definitely have more energy, but I don't know what that energy is going towards. Like another one, Herdier is just sort of bobbing up and down. It's wiggling its face fur, but like, that's not signifying that it's ready to attack. That's not signifying that it senses something and it's alert. It's just, again, moving for motion's sake. Like, that's just the common theme in a lot of these sprites. The biggest offender to me is Gyarados. What the fuck is Gyarados doing here? He's wiggling. He's just writhing. Like, he looks like a fish out of water. Like, he's the biggest, most intimidating Pokemon from the first generation, and he's just sort of doing nothing. I don't know what this animation is supposed to convey. And, you know, I'm not here to gas up the 3D models too much. I definitely think a lot of them are lackluster. They don't move enough. Taking a Pokemon like Gyarados again, like, that's sort of just hovering in the air is pretty boring. I wish he did a little bit more. And the 3D models definitely have issues that can be addressed that the 2D sprites simply don't have. Why are all the colors so saturated? Why does shiny Gengar look exactly like regular Gengar now? Like, that's just such a weird thing to do. It didn't even match the art style. Like, the Pokemon X and Y still had like the cartoony Pokemon style. You could have done the same colors as before. I don't know why they did that. However, the motion just feels better on a lot of the 3D models. And another big factor in why I feel that way is just how the sprites in Gen 5 were made. For those who don't know, in order to get the effect of moving 2D sprites, rather than animate painstakingly and time-consumingly make individual sprites for every single motion that a Pokemon had, which, you know, nearly 700 Pokemon in Black and White, that would have taken fucking ages. They made elements in the sprite separate. So a Pokemon's head would have its individual sprite, its torso would have an individual sprite, its arms and legs would have individual sprites, and they would move those elements independently of one another, so that they could save time on animating. You know, if a Pokemon needs to extend its arms or rear its head or something, it can do that without the rest of the sprite needing to move, which saves time on animating. So I get why they did that. I just feel like it is so painfully obvious that's what they did, and it makes the sprites look unnatural. You know, when you move a part of your body, you'll notice a lot of your body moves with it. You know, if you're not moving an extremity like your fingers or your toes, you need to like move a lot to get your arm going, to get your foot or even your leg going. And just trying to move those parts of your body without any other part of your body moving, it's weird, right? Like, your arm is connected to your torso. There's so many muscles in there that, you know, have to move to get your arm moving. And so having a Pokemon just sort of move its arm while the rest of its torso stays still, or, you know, rearing its head while the neck just stays put and it's just long enough that, you know, when the Pokemon moves, the neck doesn't have a gap in it. Like, that looks weird. To me, at least. I don't think everyone feels that way. I'm totally fine being in the minority on this, but just, it feels jerky. It feels unnatural. And I get why they did it. It was 100% justified. You know, no way they could have done 3D models on the DS, and there's no way they could have done moving 2D sprites in any other way without the game taking 10 years. This constant movement, this jerky, quick animation loops, the body parts moving independently of the rest of the body, it just doesn't look good to me, and I don't feel the same nostalgia and admiration for these sprites that I guess other people do. And, you know, that's not me saying the 3D models are perfect. Again, there's a lot that can be done. I'm glad they're taking some efforts to try and fix them. Venusaur finally looks like Venusaur, and I'm really happy about that. But the motion can be improved a lot, and I'm not trying to take that away. But yeah, personally, I think on average, the 3D models look a hell of a lot better than these moving 2D animation sprites. Alright, that'll be the end of this video. This was a fun experiment. I wanted to work with some more casual content, not always script everything, but the scripted videos aren't going anywhere. That's definitely my favorite to make. Is just, you know, these might be fun to do in between because the scripted videos take so long. I hope you guys enjoyed. I hope I was able to present some interesting ideas and new perspectives you hadn't considered before. Please go in the comments and tell me how wrong I am, how Wynot is actually a bad baby Pokemon. I'm sure no one's going to disagree with my 2D sprites take. Everyone's on the same page now. We're all in agreement. Handshake? True? Alright, I'm going to stop before I say something stupid. Thanks for sticking up to the end. Bye-bye.